responding to Anna's claim that the tampon tax should be abolished in the United States. Her secondary claims include the tax of tampons is discriminatory towards women because it creates female body shame. Tampons and pads are a medical device, and the tax on tampons negatively affects the lower class. Before I go into criticizing her secondary claims, there's a lot of problems with the main claim. Saying that the tampon tax should be abolished in the United States, that language is kind of confusing because tampon taxes are included in state sales taxes, and you can't really abolish something that they're not a specific tax. They're not exempt from most state sales taxes. So therefore, in order to change the issue that's there, you'd actually have to get them exempt from specific sales taxes. Saying that it should be abolished in the United States, that implies it's a national action that's required. You need individual state actions. And also, 12 out of 50 states already exempt tampons as medical devices or by statute, or they don't have state sales taxes at all. So that's just, you need to really focus on the states. But in response to claim 1, that the tax on tampons is discriminatory towards women, she also included, one of the main points is that it contributes to female body shaming, which it's kind of false causation. That might be the reason why the laws still exist, but it's kind of ridiculous to say they cause it. Mainly because menstrual taboos have existed long before tampons or sales taxes. They've existed probably before even most major religions, but it exists in the Old Testament, the Book of Leviticus, Jewish law, the Quran, Hinduism. They all place restrictions on menstruating women to the idea that blood is impure, and that's from the International Journal of Social Sciences and Humanity. Also, so she included a whole bunch of different studies, like she mentioned Trump, the UK Parliament, college experiments. The fact that there is a taboo around menstruation isn't really relevant because eliminating the tax isn't going to change that. Not enough people are aware on the tax on tampons to have an influence in how society views menstruation. It might be an echo of how society views menstruation, but it's not a cause for how society views it. Then responding to secondary claim 2, she mentioned that tampons and pads are medical devices. She references a site where it rattles off the FDA clarification of why tampons are a medical device. She used this source wrong. It was just explaining why the FDA considers tampons a medical device. She thought it meant why it should be a medical device. They are a medical device, but it's not really relevant. More relevant is that each state has different exemptions. Some tax medicine, while others may not. In California's prescription medical exemption, this will pertain to taxing tampons. It's any product that fully implanted or injected in a human, or any drug or any biologic, when such are approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, and prevent any disease, illness, or medical condition. Things like that in the actual state tax codes are what you really want to look for, and tampons don't really apply to that. And so this is more relevant than the FDA guideline that she provided. And so the fact that it's a medical device doesn't really pertain, it all depends on the state actual individual tax codes. And in response to claim 3 that tax on tampons negatively affects the lower class, she stated that it makes them harder to access and they're prohibitively expensive. Eliminating the tax isn't going to make them significantly cheaper. In one of the Washington Post articles, she said, it said in that article that average woman in California spends $7 a month on tampons, and well, state tax is around 8%. Assuming that number includes the state tax, it's going to be 50 cents cheaper without the tax, and that's just for the average woman. For a lower class woman, that average is probably lower. So 50 cents isn't going to make it significantly more accessible to women. And access to tampons is not really influenced by their taxation. They're still going to cost roughly the same with or without taxation. She mentioned in schools that they're not accessible and there's not safe spaces. It's not really relevant. And then she states that tampon tax affects poor women more. All sales taxes affect the poor more. They're really considered a poor tax because poor people spend more of their money on goods. But exempting items from sales taxes results in the other ones that aren't exempt being taxed more. So it's still going to affect the poor regardless. That was from the Tax Foundation. So in conclusion, the evidence provided does not adequately support the main claim, and many of the examples and data provided lack the relevance required to provide the support that's needed.
All right, you labeled the primary proposition, the secondary claims pretty well. I thought that you had a kind of an interesting introduction suggesting that there is some confusion over how this would have to be addressed. The state sales tax issue, I think, is an okay point to bring up. One thing, however, is you make it sound like it's particularly complicated to exempt something from sales tax. I'm not exactly sure why that would be. When you say it would have, why does it have to be nationwide? It could just be done on a state-by-state basis. And you know what? I think that the advocate would be perfectly happy with that also. It maybe doesn't have to be nationwide, but why do we have to wait for it to be done by a state-by-state basis? I also think that you ought to point out that it is a policy claim a little bit, and so I think you'd be entitled to maybe some arguments about what the economic impact would be if we lost the tax revenues, because normally that wouldn't be appropriate, but since it was phrased as a proposition of policy, I don't know that it's a huge amount of money, but I guess you could estimate it. What is the total?
They said it was it was either 12 million or like 70 million in that ballpark.
Was that for nationwide or California?
Because the thing is that it is specific because it's actually the states that don't tax tampons, they have to specifically have a statute that says tampons are not taxed.
Right. My question, what I was saying is that statistic about the $70 million, was that California or nationwide?
California.
Okay, so, I mean, that's a pretty big chunk of change, and that's a potential disadvantage on that argument. The other thing is what we were talking about, that's a separate issue. The transition to the second point is pretty good. Oh, wait. I really like the metaphor that you had there, that it's not really a cause, it's more of an echo on this particular issue, and I like the reference to the shaming issue and saying, the source of this problem is not that there's a tax on tampons, that there's a long-standing tradition on this, and at most it is an echo of that sort of thing. It's not certainly the origin of this particular problem. I like that explanation pretty well. Then you get to that second point where you're talking about the FBA definition and what the states have to do, and they have to decide to exempt it. And again, if I was the advocate, I'd say, okay, then let's do that. But remember, it's not supposed to be a policy claim, so the question shouldn't be lingering on how we would accomplish that or whether it's complicated, but rather, whether or not this has a harmful consequence, whether or not there's a negative consequence for changing this sort of thing. I'd be interested to know in California, for instance, did the advocate make reference to the fact that the governor didn't pass this recently? Or is that just something that I read about and heard about?
That did happen.
No, I know it was something, I was just asking it, because if it wasn't in their argument, it might have been something that you could have pointed out, and for instance, maybe used Brown's justification. It's probably the tax issue. The lower class argument and the economic argument, I thought you did a really nice job on that. Look, you diminished what the economic impact is for people, and you suggested that that's not disproportionate because that always falls on people who are poor because that's the way sales taxes work. Just as a thought, and I don't know because I've not been in this world, that sort of thing. Aren't those kinds of devices sometimes provided in public situations?
You have to pay,
It's like I got to put in a quarter or something? Okay. I wasn't sure, They give me free dog poop bags at the park, so I was just wondering. I'm sorry, does that sound like I was equivocating that? I mean, it's just like, it's a sanitary service. That's, I was just thinking maybe they had those kinds of things in public places. I don't know. Jeez, I just stepped in it, didn't I?